I will never forget the sound my body made hitting the hardwood floor at the bottom of my staircase. It was not just one impact, but a series of sickening thuds as I tumbled down 15 steps, each one stealing my breath and breaking something inside me. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, radiating from my hip through every nerve in my body. I could not move. I could not scream. All I could do was lie there, staring up at the ceiling of the home I had lived in for 40 years, wondering if these would be my final moments. Then I heard footsteps rushing down the stairs. Derek's face appeared above me, and suddenly he was screaming at the top of his lungs. "Mom, oh my God, Mom, someone call 911. She slipped. It was an accident. She just lost her balance." His voice cracked with what sounded like genuine panic. Tears were streaming down his face as he knelt beside me, carefully touching my shoulder. "Stay with me. Please stay with me," he begged, loud enough for the neighbors who were now gathering at my open front door to hear every word. I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell everyone the truth, but my jaw felt broken, and my words came out as nothing more than a weak moan. Derek pulled out his phone with shaking hands, dialing emergency services while keeping one hand on my arm in what would look to anyone else like the tender gesture of a devoted stepson. "My mother fell down the stairs," he told the dispatcher, his voice breaking perfectly on cue. "Please hurry. There is so much blood. I think she hit her head. I tried to catch her, but I was not fast enough." The paramedics arrived in what felt like both seconds and hours. Everything became a blur of movement and urgent voices. They asked Derek what happened, and he repeated his story flawlessly. An accident, a tragic slip, him trying desperately to grab her before she fell. They stabilized my neck with a cold plastic brace and lifted me onto a stretcher, each movement sending fresh waves of agony through my broken body. Derek walked beside the stretcher, holding my hand, playing the role of the heartbroken son for everyone watching. But as they wheeled me toward the ambulance, I knew I had one chance. With every ounce of strength I had left, I reached out and grabbed the female paramedic's sleeve. She leaned down close to my face, and I whispered through broken teeth and blood, "It was not an accident. He pushed me." I expected her to look confused or dismiss my words as confusion from the head injury. Instead, her eyes met mine with an intensity that gave me hope. She squeezed my hand gently and leaned even closer, her voice barely audible over the chaos around us. "I know," she whispered back. "We installed cameras in your house last week. Detective Morrison is waiting for you at the hospital, and officers are arresting your stepson right now." Before we continue with my story, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories of survival and justice. My name is Margaret Eleanor Thompson, and I am 68 years old. For more than 4 decades, I have been the person everyone in my family depends on. I am the mother who never missed a school play, the wife who kept her marriage vows through sickness and health, and the grandmother who bakes cookies every Sunday for family visits. After my first husband died of cancer 15 years ago, I thought my chapter of love and companionship had closed forever. The grief nearly destroyed me, but I survived for my children and grandchildren. Then 3 years ago, I met Richard at a grief support group. He was a widower, a kind hospital administrator with gentle eyes and a quiet strength that reminded me it was okay to live again. We married after a year of courtship, and I opened my heart and my home to him completely. Richard had a grown son named Derek, 35 years old, recently divorced, and struggling to find his footing in life. When Derek's business failed 6 months ago and he had nowhere to go, I did not hesitate. "Family takes care of family," I told Richard. I welcomed Derek into the house my parents left me, gave him the largest guest room, and treated him exactly as I had treated my own children. I cooked his favorite meals every single day. I washed and ironed his clothes. I never asked him for rent or utilities, even though my modest teacher's pension meant every dollar mattered. When he seemed sad, I sat with him and listened. When he needed advice, I offered it without judgment. I believed that love and patience could heal anyone's wounds. My neighbors called me the kindest woman on our street, always the first to bring soup when someone was sick or flowers when someone was grieving. This house, with its creaking stairs and rose garden out back, represented everything I had worked for and everyone I had loved. My parents bought it in 1960. I raised my children here. I buried my first husband's ashes in the garden he planted. Every corner held a memory. Every room told a story. I never imagined that opening my home to Derek would nearly cost me my life. I never imagined that my kindness would be seen not as love, but as an opportunity for murder. Life in those first 6 months after Derek moved in felt like everything I had hoped for when I married Richard. For the first time since my first husband passed, I truly felt like I had a complete family again. Every morning, my alarm would go off at 6 o'clock, and I would slip quietly out of bed, careful not to wake Richard, who worked such long hours at the hospital. The house would be silent and peaceful as I made my way downstairs in my slippers, the wooden steps creaking in that familiar way they had for decades. I would start the coffee maker and then begin preparing breakfast. Richard loved scrambled eggs with cheese and toast, so I made that for him every single morning without fail. By 6:30, the smell of coffee and bacon would fill the kitchen, and Richard would appear in his scrubs, kissing my cheek and calling me his angel. We would sit together for 20 minutes before his shift started, talking about our plans for the day, laughing about something we had watched on television the night before. Those quiet morning moments meant everything to me. After Richard left for the hospital, I would prepare a second breakfast for Derek. He usually slept until 9 or 10, recovering from his ordeal with the divorce and business failure. I wanted him to feel cared for, to know that this house was a safe place where he could heal and rebuild his confidence. When he finally came downstairs, I would have pancakes or waffles waiting, fresh fruit cut into a bowl, and orange juice poured. "You are spoiling me, Margaret," he would say with a smile, and I would laugh and tell him that is what mothers do. My days had a comfortable rhythm that brought me deep satisfaction. After breakfast, I would tend to my rose garden, the one my mother had planted when I was just a little girl. I knew every bush by heart, every color and variety. The neighbors would walk by and stop to compliment the blooms, and we would chat over the white picket fence about their grandchildren or the upcoming church potluck. Mrs. Chen from next door would bring me fresh vegetables from her garden, and I would give her roses to brighten her kitchen table. The sense of community and belonging filled my heart. In the afternoons, I would do the household chores. I washed Derek's clothes along with ours, folded everything neatly, and placed his clean laundry outside his bedroom door. I vacuumed, dusted, and kept the house exactly as my mother had taught me, with pride and attention to detail. Sometimes Derek would offer to help, carrying heavy things or reaching high shelves, and I would thank him and tell him what a good son he was becoming to me. On weekends, we would have family dinners that reminded me of the old days when my own children were young. I would spend hours in the kitchen preparing roast chicken or pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and homemade rolls. Derek would set the table, Richard would pour the wine, and we would sit together in my dining room with the good china my mother had passed down to me. We would tell stories, laugh until our sides hurt, and I would look around that table and feel overwhelming gratitude. This was what I had prayed for during those lonely years after my first husband died. A family, a purpose, a home filled with love and voices and life. I would go to bed each night holding Richard's hand, listening to the sound of Derek moving around in the room down the hall, and I would whisper a prayer of thanks. I had been given a second chance at family, and I was determined to cherish every moment of it. I felt useful. I felt needed. I felt loved. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now buzzed with the warmth of 3 lives intertwined. I had no idea that beneath the surface of those perfect moments a plan was forming that would shatter everything I believed about family, trust, and safety. I had no idea that my acts of kindness were being counted not as love, but as weaknesses to exploit. The first time I felt something was wrong happened on a Tuesday morning in late September. I remember the date because it was the day after Derek's birthday, and I had baked him a 3-layer chocolate cake the night before. Richard had already left for his early shift at the hospital, and I was making my way down the hallway with fresh towels for the linen closet. As I passed my home office, I noticed the door was slightly open. I always kept that door closed because the room held important documents and family photos I was organizing into albums. I pushed the door open and found Derek standing at my desk with the bottom drawer pulled out completely. Papers were spread across the desktop, and he had my reading glasses in his hand, which struck me as odd because he had perfect vision. When he heard me enter, he jumped slightly and turned around with a smile that appeared just a second too late. "Oh, Margaret, you startled me," he said with a little laugh. "I was just looking for a pen. I hope you do not mind." I looked at my desk and noticed that the papers he had been looking at were not just any papers. They were statements from my bank, documents from my financial advisor, and a copy of my property deed. "There are pens in the kitchen drawer," I said softly, trying to keep my voice light and non-judgmental. "You know you can always ask me if you need something." Derek quickly gathered the papers and shoved them back into the drawer in a messy pile, so unlike the organized way I always kept them. "You are right. I should have asked. I just did not want to bother you while you were doing laundry." He walked past me and headed toward his room, leaving me standing there with an uncomfortable feeling settling in my stomach like a stone. I told myself it was nothing. Derek was stressed about finding a new job and getting his life back on track. Maybe he was embarrassed about his financial situation and was simply curious about how normal people managed their money. I straightened the papers in my drawer, made a mental note to be more careful about locking it, and went about my day. But then, small things kept happening that I could not quite explain. A few days later, I discovered documents from my lawyer's office scattered on the kitchen counter. These were papers I distinctly remembered locking in my filing cabinet in the office, papers related to my will and estate planning that I had updated 6 months earlier. When I asked Derek if he had seen how they got there, he barely looked up from his phone. "Dad probably pulled them out looking for something," he said casually. But that made no sense. Richard had been working double shifts all week and had barely been home except to sleep. He would have no reason to go through my legal documents, and even if he did, he would have asked me first. We had that kind of marriage built on respect and communication. I picked up the papers and noticed they were out of order, as if someone had been reading through them carefully and had not bothered to put them back properly. That evening, around 10 o'clock, I got up to get a glass of water from the kitchen. As I walked past Derek's room, I heard his voice through the closed door. He was on the phone with someone, and his tone was low and intense, not like his usual casual conversations. I did not mean to eavesdrop, but I froze in the hallway when I heard him say, "Just a few more weeks and everything will be in place. Yes, I am sure. Everything will be ours soon." My heart started beating faster. Ours? What did he mean by ours? I stood there in the dark hallway, barely breathing, straining to hear more. But then I heard footsteps approaching the door from inside his room. I quickly moved away and hurried to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I poured my water. When Derek emerged a moment later and saw me in the kitchen, his expression shifted from surprise to something I could not quite read. "Could not sleep?" he asked. "Just thirsty," I replied, forcing a smile. He nodded and went to the refrigerator, grabbing a bottle of water. "I was just talking to a potential employer," he said, though I had not asked. "They might have an opportunity for me." Fingers crossed. "That is wonderful news," I said, but the words felt hollow in my mouth. As I went back to bed that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Richard was snoring softly beside me, exhausted from another long day. I wanted to wake him up and tell him about the strange things I had noticed. But what would I say? That his son was looking through my desk? That he was on the phone late at night discussing something that would be ours? It all sounded so paranoid, so suspicious of me to even think such things. Derek had been nothing but grateful and kind since he moved in. He thanked me constantly, helped carry groceries, and called me Mom with what seemed like genuine affection. Surely I was reading too much into innocent coincidences. I closed my eyes and told myself to stop being a foolish old woman who watched too many crime shows on television. But deep down, in a place I did not want to acknowledge, a tiny voice whispered that something was very, very wrong. Over the next several days, I worked hard to convince myself that I was being completely unreasonable. Every time that uncomfortable feeling crept into my thoughts, I pushed it away and replaced it with logical explanations that made me feel foolish for ever doubting Derek in the first place. This was not the kind of person I wanted to be. I had spent my entire life believing in the goodness of people, especially family, and I was not about to let paranoia and suspicion poison the home I had worked so hard to fill with love. I told myself that Derek was simply going through an incredibly difficult time in his life. His divorce had been messy and painful, leaving him emotionally scarred and financially devastated. His business had failed after he had poured his heart and savings into it, and that kind of loss would make anyone act strangely. Of course he would be stressed. Of course he might be looking at financial documents to understand how successful people manage their money. He was probably embarrassed to ask for advice directly, so he was trying to learn on his own. That showed initiative and pride, not malicious intent. The late-night phone call that I had overheard was obviously about a job opportunity, just as he had explained. When he said, "Everything will be ours," he probably meant that he and his potential business partners would share the profits of some new venture. I was inserting myself into a conversation I had only heard fragments of, filling in the blanks with my own fearful imagination. How incredibly unfair of me to twist his words into something sinister when he had done nothing but show me respect and gratitude. I remembered my own children going through difficult periods in their 20s and 30s. My daughter had struggled with postpartum depression and had acted withdrawn and secretive, and I had supported her through it with patience and understanding. My son had lost his job during the recession and had become irritable and distant, but I never stopped believing in him. Derek deserved that same compassion and benefit of the doubt. Just because he was my stepson and not my biological child did not mean he deserved less grace from me. Richard had raised a good man. Yes, Derek had made mistakes and poor choices that led to his current situation, but that did not make him a bad person. It made him human. I thought about all the times Derek had been kind to me over the past 6 months. He had fixed the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom without being asked. He had carried heavy grocery bags from my car when my arthritis was bothering me. He had sat with me and watched my favorite old movies, even though I knew he found them boring. These were not the actions of someone with evil intentions. I also had to acknowledge my own tendency to worry too much. Richard often teased me gently about being an anxious person who catastrophized small problems. When the doctor called to reschedule my routine checkup, I convinced myself something terrible was wrong. When my daughter did not return my call for 2 days, I imagined car accidents and hospital emergencies. This was just another example of my overactive imagination, taking innocent circumstances and turning them into something frightening. The guilt I felt for suspecting Derek was overwhelming. Here was a young man who had lost nearly everything, and instead of offering him unconditional love and support, I was secretly questioning his character and motives. What kind of stepmother did that make me? What would Richard think if he knew I was harboring these terrible suspicions about his only son? It would break his heart and damage our marriage, possibly beyond repair. I decided the best way to make amends for my unfair thoughts was to be even more kind and generous to Derek. That weekend, I spent an entire afternoon baking his favorite chocolate cake from scratch, the same recipe my mother had taught me when I was a young bride. I made it with 3 layers, rich chocolate frosting, and I even drove to the specialty store across town to get the exact brand of cocoa powder that made it taste perfect. When I presented the cake to Derek after dinner, his face lit up with genuine surprise and happiness. "Margaret, you did not have to do this," he said, giving me a warm hug. "You are too good to me." "Nonsense," I replied, my heart swelling with relief and affection. "You are family, and family takes care of each other." As I cut him an extra-large slice and watched him enjoy every bite, I felt the last of my suspicions melt away like snow in spring sunshine. I had been so wrong to doubt him. Everything was fine. We were a family, and families trusted each other. I went to bed that night feeling peaceful and grateful that I had not said anything to Richard about my foolish worries. Some things were better left unspoken, and this was definitely one of them. Looking back now, I realize that my denial was not just about wanting to see the good in Derek. It was about protecting myself from a truth too painful to accept, that I had invited danger into my home, that my judgment had failed me, and that the safe haven I had created over 40 years was no longer safe at all. It was a Thursday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after I had baked Derek that chocolate cake and convinced myself I was being paranoid. Richard was working another long shift at the hospital, and Derek had mentioned that morning he would be out for most of the day meeting with potential employers. I decided it would be a perfect time to do some deep cleaning of the house, something I did every few months to keep everything fresh and organized. I started with the guest rooms and bathrooms, working my way through the house with my vacuum and cleaning supplies. When I reached Derek's room, I knocked out of habit, even though I knew he was not home. He'd never minded me cleaning his space before. In fact, he had always thanked me for keeping his room tidy and doing his laundry. I opened the door and began straightening up, changing his sheets, dusting his furniture, and organizing the items on his dresser. As I pulled the fitted sheet off his mattress to replace it with a fresh one, something slid out from underneath and fell onto the floor with a soft thud. It was a large manila envelope, the kind you use for important documents. My first instinct was to simply pick it up and place it on his desk so he would know it had fallen. But as I bent down to retrieve it, I noticed that the envelope was not sealed. The flap was tucked in loosely and some papers were visible inside. I should have just put it back. I should have respected his privacy. But something made me pause. Maybe it was all those little suspicions I had been trying so hard to ignore. Maybe it was instinct. Whatever it was, I opened the envelope and pulled out the contents, and in that moment my entire world shifted on its axis. Inside were photocopies of documents I recognized immediately. There was a copy of my last will and testament, the one I had updated with my lawyer just 6 months before Derek moved in. There were copies of the property deed to my house, showing that I was the sole owner, inherited from my parents decades ago. There were my bank statements from the past 3 months, statements I had never shared with anyone outside of Richard and my financial advisor. There were documents about my life insurance policy, with the death benefit amount highlighted in yellow marker. My hands began to tremble as I looked through page after page, but what made my blood turn to ice were the handwritten notes scribbled in the margins in Derek's distinctive slanted handwriting. Next to the property deed, he had written, "House value estimated $890,000. Next to my bank statements, savings $340,000. Next to my life insurance policy, death benefit $500,000. At the bottom of that page, underlined twice, total assets approximately $1.7 million, no other heirs listed. I felt dizzy and had to sit down on the edge of his bed. How did he get copies of these documents? When did he make them? My mind flashed back to all those times I had found papers out of place, drawers left open, my office door ajar. He had been systematically going through my private files, photographing or copying everything related to my finances and estate. But there was more. Underneath all the financial documents was a sheet of lined notebook paper with what appeared to be a timeline written in Derek's handwriting. At the top, it said, "Plan, Timeline." Below that were dates and notes. Week 1 to 2, gather all financial documents. Week 3 to 4, confirm beneficiary status with Richard. Week 5 to 6, Isolate M from friends, social connections. Week 7-8, execute plan. I looked at the date on the top of the page. Week 7 started 3 days ago. At the very bottom of this page, written in red ink and underlined 3 times, were 4 words that made my heart stop completely. Make it look accidental. I heard the front door open downstairs. Derek was home early. My heart began pounding so violently I thought it might burst through my chest. With shaking hands, I quickly shoved all the papers back into the manila envelope, trying desperately to remember the exact order they had been in. I tucked the envelope back under his mattress, exactly where it had fallen from, and quickly pulled the fitted sheet back over the bed. I heard his footsteps on the stairs. He was coming up. I grabbed the pile of clean sheets I had brought in and forced myself to walk calmly toward the door, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. As I stepped into the hallway, Derek appeared at the top of the stairs. Our eyes met, and for just a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker across his face. Suspicion, calculation, but then his usual friendly smile appeared. "Hey, Margaret, you are cleaning today?" he asked casually. "Just changing the sheets," I replied, amazed that my voice sounded almost normal. "I did not expect you back so early." "The meeting got canceled," he said, watching me carefully. "Is everything okay? You look pale." "Just a bit tired," I lied. "I think I will go lie down for a while." I walked past him toward my bedroom, feeling his eyes on my back the entire way. Once inside with the door closed, I sat on my bed and realized I was shaking uncontrollably. This was not paranoia. This was not my imagination. This was real, documented proof that my stepson was planning something terrible. And according to his timeline, it was happening very soon. That evening felt like the longest of my entire life. Richard called around 6 to say he had been asked to work a double shift because 2 nurses had called in sick. He would not be home until tomorrow morning. My stomach dropped when he told me this. It meant I would be alone in the house with Derek for the entire night. I tried to keep my voice steady as I told Richard that was fine, that I understood that I would see him tomorrow. But inside, panic was rising like a flood. I could not eat dinner. My hands shook as I prepared a simple pasta dish, going through the motions while my mind raced with questions. Should I call the police? And tell them what? That my stepson had copies of my financial documents? That he had written a timeline on a piece of paper? They would think I was a paranoid old woman. Should I confront Derek directly? Should I pack a bag and go to a hotel? But running away felt like admitting I was afraid in my own home, and some stubborn part of me refused to be driven out of the house my parents had left me. Derek came down for dinner acting completely normal, as if nothing was wrong. He complimented my cooking, told me about his canceled meeting, and asked about my day. I pushed food around my plate and gave short answers, unable to meet his eyes. When dinner was over, I told him I had a headache and was going to bed early. I went upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and sat on my bed fully clothed, staring at my phone. Should I call Richard? Should I call my daughter? What would I even say? Around 9 o'clock, I heard Derek coming up the stairs. His footsteps were slow and deliberate. They stopped outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, watching the doorknob, praying he would keep walking to his own room. After what felt like an eternity, his footsteps continued down the hallway. I heard his bedroom door open and close. I waited an hour, then quietly unlocked my door and crept downstairs to get a glass of water. My throat was bone dry from fear and anxiety. The house was dark except for a small lamp I had left on in the living room. As I stood at the kitchen sink drinking water, I heard a sound behind me. I spun around and nearly dropped my glass. Derek was standing in the doorway, backlit by the dim light from the living room. He was not supposed to be there. I had heard him go into his room. How long had he been standing there watching me? "You were in my room today," he said quietly. It was not a question. It was a statement. My mouth went dry. "I was changing your sheets like I always do." He took a step closer. "You found the envelope." There was no point in lying. He could see the truth written all over my face. "Yes," I whispered. Derek nodded slowly, and in that moment something changed in his expression. The mask of the grateful, struggling stepson fell away completely, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "I wondered how long it would take you to find it," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Honestly, I am a little disappointed. I thought you would have discovered it weeks ago. You really are too trusting, Margaret." "How did you get those documents?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Those are private. Some of them were locked in my filing cabinet." He smiled, and it was the most chilling smile I had ever seen. "Locks are easy, Margaret. You leave spare keys in the kitchen drawer. It took me about 2 days to figure out which key opened your filing cabinet. After that, it was simple. I waited until you and Dad were asleep, went into your office, and photographed everything I needed with my phone. You never even knew I was there." Tears began streaming down my face. "Why? Why would you do this? I welcomed you into my home. I treated you like my own son." "Because you are sitting on nearly $2 million in assets while living like a middle-class retiree," he said, his voice rising with frustration. "Do you have any idea how unfair that is? My business failed. My wife took half of everything in the divorce. I have nothing, and you have this house, that bank account, that life insurance policy, all just sitting there waiting for you to die of old age 20 years from now." The cruelty of his words hit me like physical blows. "So your plan is what? To kill me for my money?" "Do not be so dramatic," Derek said, stepping closer until he was just a few feet away. "Elderly people have accidents all the time. They fall down stairs. They slip in bathtubs. They forget to turn off the stove. It is tragic, but it happens. And when it does, my father inherits everything as your husband. And when something eventually happens to my father, I inherit everything as his only child. It is really quite simple." I could not believe what I was hearing. This was a nightmare, but I was wide awake. "Richard would never be part of this," I said desperately. "He loves me." "Of course he does," Derek agreed. "My father knows nothing about this. He is a good man, which is exactly why this will work. When you have your tragic accident, he will be devastated. He will grieve. He will never suspect that his own son orchestrated it. And I will be right there beside him, the supportive son, helping him through his loss." "I will tell him," I said, trying to sound brave even though I was terrified. "I will tell Richard everything. I will show him that envelope. I will go to the police." Derek laughed, a cold sound that made my skin crawl. "And say what? That I made copies of some family documents? That I wrote notes about asset values? None of that is illegal, Margaret. At worst, I am guilty of being nosy about family finances. You have no proof of any actual crime because I have not committed one yet." The word "yet" hung in the air between us like a threat. "But now that you know," Derek continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "the timeline has to move up. I was planning to wait another week, but we cannot have you running around telling people your crazy conspiracy theories about me, can we?" He took another step toward me, and I backed up until I was pressed against the kitchen counter with nowhere to go. "You will not get away with this," I whispered. But even I could hear how weak and powerless my words sounded. Derek smiled that terrible smile again. "Yes, Margaret, I will." As I stood there, trapped against the kitchen counter with Derek blocking my only exit, my mind began racing through the past 6 months like a horror film playing in reverse. Every kind gesture, every grateful smile, every moment I had interpreted as family bonding suddenly revealed itself as something much darker. This was not a spontaneous plan born from recent desperation. This had been calculated and orchestrated from the very beginning, perhaps even before Derek had moved into my home. I remembered the day Richard first asked if Derek could stay with us. It was 6 months ago, and Richard had seemed almost apologetic about it. His apartment lease is ending. and he is really struggling financially after the divorce and business failure," Richard had explained. "Would you mind if he stayed here temporarily just until he gets back on his feet?" I had agreed immediately, eager to show Richard that I embraced his son as my own family. But now I wondered, had Derek manipulated that situation? Had he deliberately let his lease expire to force this living arrangement? My thoughts flashed to 3 months ago when Derek had casually asked me about my will over morning coffee. "Margaret, you have everything in order legally, right? Updated will, power of attorney, all that stuff. After what happened with my divorce, I learned how important estate planning is." It had seemed like such mature, responsible concern at the time. Now I understood he was gathering intelligence, confirming that Richard was my primary beneficiary, and that Derek would eventually inherit everything through his father. I thought about how Derek had systematically isolated me from my support system over the past few months, so gradually and skillfully that I had not even noticed it happening. When my friend Patricia called to invite me to our monthly book club, Derek had mentioned that I looked tired and should rest instead. "You do so much for everyone, Margaret. You deserve a break." I had canceled, thinking he was being thoughtful. The next month, he suggested the same thing. After 3 cancellations, Patricia stopped calling. When my daughter invited me to visit her and the grandchildren for a weekend, Derek had looked concerned. "Are you sure you are up for that drive, Margaret? It is 3 hours each way and your arthritis has been bothering you." Richard had agreed, worried about my health, and I had postponed the visit, then postponed it again. Now it had been 4 months since I had seen my grandchildren in person, when I used to visit every few weeks. Derek had even influenced my relationship with the neighbors. When Mrs. Chen invited me to her daughter's wedding shower, Derek had mentioned that big crowds might be overwhelming for someone my age. When the church called about volunteering for the holiday food drive, something I had done for 20 years, Derek suggested I was taking on too much and should focus on my health. Slowly, carefully, he had cut the threads that connected me to the outside world until I was spending almost all my time at home with just him and Richard. And Richard. Oh God, Richard. I realize now that Derek had been manipulating his father's work schedule too. "Dad, they really need you at the hospital. You are so good at what you do. I will keep Mom company. Do not worry about her being alone." Richard had been taking extra shifts for months, proud that his son was being so responsible and caring toward me. Derek had engineered it perfectly so that Richard was gone more and more, leaving Derek alone with me for longer stretches of time. The water spill on the stairs 2 weeks ago that I had thought was accidental, the medications that had been moved in my bathroom cabinet which could have been switched or tampered with, the time I found the gas stove burner turned on low with nothing cooking on it, and Derek said I must have forgotten to turn it off completely. These were not accidents or my forgetfulness. These were tests. He had been practicing, experimenting, seeing if he could stage situations that would look like elderly mistakes or accidents. I looked at Derek standing there in my kitchen, and I realized I was looking at someone who had spent months studying me like a predator studies prey. He knew my routine down to the minute. He knew when I took my medications, when I did laundry, when I went up and down the stairs. He knew that Richard would be working late tonight. He probably knew Richard's schedule better than Richard did because Derek had been carefully manipulating it for months. "You planned this before you even moved in, didn't you?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The failed business, the divorce, needing a place to stay, it was all leading to this. Derek tilted his head, studying me with something that might have been respect. "The business and divorce were real," he admitted, "but they taught me something valuable. I am tired of struggling while other people sit on wealth they did not earn. You inherited this house from your parents, Margaret. You inherited money from your first husband's life insurance. You did not build anything. You just got lucky being born into the right family and marrying the right men. Why should you have everything while I have nothing?" The twisted logic of his entitlement was staggering. He genuinely believed he deserved my home, my savings, my life, simply because he wanted them, and I had them. There was no remorse in his eyes, no recognition that what he was planning was evil. To him, I was just an obstacle standing between him and financial security, an elderly woman who had lived long enough and should now conveniently disappear so he could inherit what he felt was rightfully his. "When?" I asked, the word catching in my throat. "When were you planning to do it?" Derek glanced at the clock on the kitchen wall. It was nearly 10 o'clock at night. Richard would not be home until morning. The neighbors' houses were dark. No one knew I was in danger. No one would hear me scream. "Actually," Derek said, taking another step toward me, "I was thinking tonight would be perfect." Time seemed to stop in that moment. The kitchen that had been the heart of my home for 40 years suddenly felt like a trap closing in around me. I looked at Derek's face, cold and determined, and something inside me shattered completely. My legs gave out and I slid down the cabinet until I was sitting on the floor, my back against the wooden doors, tears streaming down my face uncontrollably. This could not be how my story ended. Not like this. Not murdered in my own kitchen by someone I had welcomed with open arms and an open heart. I thought about my parents who had bought this house in 1960, working double shifts at the factory to afford the down payment. I could see my mother standing at this very stove, teaching me how to make her famous pot roast, telling me that someday this house would be mine and I should fill it with love and laughter. She had been dead for 15 years, but I felt her presence so strongly in that moment, and I wondered if she was ashamed of me for being so foolish, for trusting a stranger with the home she had sacrificed so much to give me. I thought about my first husband, David, and the life we had built together in these rooms. I could see him clearly, young and strong, painting the nursery blue when we were expecting our first child. I remembered him chasing our kids through these hallways, their laughter echoing off the walls. I remembered holding his hand in the bedroom upstairs as cancer slowly stole him from me, and his last words, "You are the strongest woman I know, Maggie. You are going to be okay." But I was not okay. I was sitting on the kitchen floor about to be murdered, and David was not here to protect me. The weight of every sacrifice I had ever made crashed down on me all at once. I had worked 2 jobs after David died to keep this house and put my children through college. I had gone without new clothes, without vacations, without luxuries, so my kids could have opportunities I never had. I had attended every soccer game, every school play, every graduation, always putting their needs above my own. I had rebuilt my life after devastating loss, found love again with Richard, and opened my home to his son, because that is what good people do. That is what family means. And this was my reward, to die alone on my kitchen floor at the hands of someone who saw me not as a person, but as an inconvenient obstacle worth nearly $2 million. The cruelty of it was suffocating. I had spent 68 years trying to be good, trying to be kind, trying to help others. I had volunteered at the church, brought meals to sick neighbors, donated to charities even when money was tight. I had loved deeply and forgiven quickly. I had been the person everyone could count on, the one who showed up when others needed help. And for what? So a greedy man could push me down the stairs and steal everything my parents and late husband had worked so hard to give me? I looked up at Derek through my tears, and he was checking his phone, completely unmoved by my breakdown. To him, my tears were just noise, an inconvenience he had to endure before finishing what he came here to do. I was not a person to him. I was not Margaret, the woman who had cooked his meals and washed his clothes and treated him with maternal love. I was just a financial transaction waiting to be completed. "Please," I whispered, my voice broken and desperate. "Please do not do this. I will give you money. I will change my will. I will give you whatever you want. Just please do not hurt me." Derek looked down at me with something that might have been pity, but it was the cold pity you might feel for an insect you were about to step on. It is too late for that, Margaret. You know too much now. Even if I let you go tonight, you would tell Richard everything. You would go to the police. You would ruin everything. The only way this works is if you are not here anymore. I thought about my grandchildren, beautiful children who still believed the world was safe and that family members protected each other. Who would explain to them what happened to Grandma Margaret? Would they grow up thinking I had simply been clumsy, an old woman who fell down the stairs? Or would they someday learn the truth, that their step-uncle had murdered me for money, and would that knowledge poison their ability to trust anyone? I thought about Richard, kind and trusting Richard, who would blame himself for his son's actions. The guilt would destroy him. He would replay every conversation, every decision, wondering how he missed the monster living under his own roof. Our marriage would die along with me, not in the physical sense, but in the way that matters. Richard would never forgive himself, and Derek would be right there, playing the supportive son, comforting his father while secretly counting the days until he could inherit everything. The injustice of it all was crushing. I had survived so much in my life: poverty, loss, heartbreak, loneliness. I had rebuilt myself over and over again. And this was how it ended. Sitting on my kitchen floor, completely helpless, waiting for a man I had shown nothing but kindness to murder me in cold blood. I closed my eyes and felt the last of my strength drain away. I had fought so hard for so long and I had nothing left. I was just a tired old woman who had made the fatal mistake of trusting someone who saw kindness as weakness and generosity as opportunity. In that moment of complete despair, I truly believed this was the end of my story, and it was the most unfair, senseless ending I could have ever imagined. I do not know how long I sat there on that cold kitchen floor with tears streaming down my face. It might have been seconds or minutes. Time felt distorted, moving both too fast and impossibly slow. Derek was still standing over me, looking at his phone, probably checking the time and calculating his next move. He seemed in no rush, confident that I was broken and helpless, that the hardest part of his plan was already done. He had crushed my spirit, and now the physical act of killing me would be simple. But then something happened that I cannot fully explain. Maybe it was the way Derek glanced at the staircase in the hallway, already visualizing how he would stage my fall. Maybe it was the casual cruelty in his expression, the complete absence of remorse or humanity. Or maybe it was the memory of my mother's voice that suddenly filled my head as clearly as if she were standing right beside me. Strong women do not stay down, Margaret. We get back up. Always. My mother had said those words to me when I was 12 years old and had been bullied at school. She said them again when my first husband died, and I thought grief would destroy me. She'd been the strongest woman I ever knew, working factory jobs, raising 4 children, surviving poverty and loss and heartbreak, and she never once gave up. Her strength was in my blood, in my bones, and somewhere beneath the fear and despair, that strength was still there, waiting for me to remember it. I looked up at Derek, really looked at him, and something shifted inside my chest. The crushing weight of helplessness began to lift, replaced by something hot and fierce that I had not felt in years. Anger. Pure, righteous anger. Who is this spoiled, entitled man to decide that my life was worth less than his bank account? Who was he to think he could walk into my home, my sanctuary, and take everything from me just because he felt he deserved it more? I had survived poverty, widowhood, loneliness, and loss. I had raised children, buried loved ones, and rebuilt my life from ashes more than once. I had been a fighter my entire life, even when I did not realize it. Every morning I woke up after David died was an act of defiance against despair. Every meal I cooked, every bill I paid, every time I chose to keep going when it would have been easier to give up. Those were all acts of quiet, persistent strength. And now this man, this weak, greedy coward who had never built anything or survived anything real, thought he could simply erase me? He thought I would just lie down and let him win? No. The word echoed in my mind like a bell, clear and strong. No, I would not go quietly. I would not make this easy for him. Even if I died tonight, I would fight. I would scream. I would make sure there was evidence, scratches on his face, my DNA under my fingernails, anything that would make the police question his story about an accidental fall. If I was going down, I was taking him with me, one way or another. But then I remembered something that made my heart skip a beat. 2 weeks ago, when I had first started feeling suspicious, I had called my old friend, Detective Sarah Morrison. Sarah had been married to David's best friend years ago, and even after her husband passed, we had stayed in touch. I had told her about my concerns, about the strange behavior, about feeling unsafe in my own home. At the time, I had felt foolish making that call, like a paranoid old woman wasting a detective's time. But Sarah had not dismissed me. She had listened carefully and said something I had almost forgotten in my panic. "Margaret, I take these concerns very seriously. Give me a few days to arrange something. In the meantime, keep your phone with you at all times. And if anything escalates, you call 911 immediately. Promise me." I had promised. And then Sarah had called me back 3 days later and said she had worked with a victim advocacy unit to install hidden cameras throughout my house. "They are so small you will not even notice them," she had explained. "But if Derek does anything at all, we will have proof. You are not alone in this, Margaret. We are watching." The cameras. There were cameras recording everything right now. This conversation, Derek's confession, his threats. It was all being captured. Even if he killed me tonight, there would be evidence. He would not get away with this. I felt strength flooding back into my limbs. I took a deep breath and slowly, carefully began to push myself up from the floor. Derek watched me with mild surprise, probably expecting me to stay collapsed and defeated. "What are you doing?" he asked. I steadied myself against the counter and looked him directly in the eyes. My voice came out stronger than I expected, no longer shaking with fear but steady with determination. "I am not going to make this easy for you, Derek. If you want to hurt me, you are going to have to work for it, and I promise you, you will not get away with this." For the first time that night, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. He had expected a helpless victim, but now he was seeing something different. He was seeing a fighter. He was seeing a woman who had decided that if this was her last night on Earth, she would spend it standing tall, not cowering on the floor. "You cannot stop me," Derek said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "Maybe not," I replied, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "But I can make sure everyone knows what you really are." What Derek did not know, what he could not possibly have known, was that I had been preparing for this moment for the past 2 weeks. While he thought he was the mastermind executing a perfect plan, I had been quietly building a cage around him brick by brick, with help from people who actually cared whether I lived or died. It started with that phone call to Detective Sarah Morrison 14 days ago. I had felt foolish calling her with vague suspicions and strange feelings, but Sarah had taken me seriously in a way that probably saved my life. "Margaret, I have seen too many cases where people ignored their instincts," she had told me. "Your gut is telling you something is wrong, and I believe you. Let me help." Sarah had connected me with a victim advocacy unit that specialized in elder abuse and domestic threats. Within 48 hours, they had sent a team to my house while Derek was out job hunting and Richard was at work. They disguised themselves as cable repair technicians, and I let them in through the back door. For 3 hours, they installed tiny cameras throughout my home, in the living room, kitchen, hallway, and at the top and bottom of the staircase. The cameras were no bigger than shirt buttons, hidden in picture frames, smoke detectors, and even the decorative molding along the ceiling. These cameras have audio and video, the technician explained as he showed me how they worked on a tablet. Everything is being recorded and backed up to a secure cloud server in real time. Even if someone destroys the cameras, we will have all the footage. Detective Morrison and 2 other officers have access to the feed 24 hours a day. If anything happens, they will know immediately. I also did something Derek never would have expected from a 68-year-old woman who could barely use her smartphone. I started recording our conversations. After I found that envelope under his mattress, I went to the electronics store and bought a small digital voice recorder, the kind journalists use for interviews. It was so tiny it fit in the palm of my hand. I kept it in the pocket of my cardigan sweater, and every time Derek and I talked, I pressed the record button. I had hours of audio now, stored both on the device and backed up to my email account that Derek did not even know existed. 3 days ago, I had also updated my will with my lawyer, Mr. Patterson, who had handled my family's legal affairs for 30 years. I told him everything about my suspicions, and he had looked at me with deep concern. "Margaret, if you are in danger, you need to go to the police right now," he insisted. But I explained that Sarah was already helping me gather evidence. Mr. Patterson then did something crucial. He added a special clause to my will stating that if I died under suspicious circumstances, a full investigation must be completed before any assets could be distributed. And Derek would be automatically excluded as a beneficiary regardless of his father's inheritance. "This creates a legal incentive for him not to harm you," Mr. Patterson explained, "and it protects your assets even if something happens." I had also written 3 detailed letters explaining everything I had discovered. The documents under Derek's mattress, his suspicious behavior, my fears for my safety. One letter I mailed to my daughter with instructions not to open it unless something happened to me. One letter I gave to my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, in a sealed envelope, asking her to give it to the police if I died or disappeared. The 3rd letter I had given directly to Sarah Morrison, who had filed it as part of an official police report documenting my concerns. But my most important preparation was something Derek could not see or find. I had made the conscious decision to not be a silent victim. When he confronted me tonight in the kitchen, when he confessed his plan to kill me, I had asked questions. I had gotten him to say everything out loud, his timeline, his methods, his motive, his complete lack of remorse. Every word was being recorded by both the hidden cameras and the voice recorder in my pocket. Now, standing in my kitchen facing him, I knew that even if he killed me in the next 5 minutes, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. The cameras had captured his abhorrent confession. The audio recorder had his voice admitting to planning my murder. Detective Morrison was probably already watching the live feed, already dispatching officers to my address. Derek thought he was in control, but he had walked directly into a trap he never saw coming. He had underestimated me in the most fundamental way possible. He saw an elderly woman, fragile and trusting, easy to manipulate, and easier to kill. He never considered that beneath my kind exterior was a survivor who had learned long ago that the world is not always safe, and that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones you invite into your home. "What are you smiling about?" Derek asked, noticing the slight change in my expression. "I am just thinking about how badly you miscalculated," I said quietly. "You see, Derek, I am not as helpless as you think I am, and you are not as smart as you believe yourself to be." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, straightening my shoulders and looking him directly in the face, "that every word you have said tonight has been recorded. Every threat, every confession, every single detail of your plan. It is all evidence now, and even if you kill me, you will never see a penny of my money. You will only see the inside of a prison cell." The color drained from Derek's face as the full implications of my words began to sink in. For a moment, Derek just stood there frozen, his face going pale as the blood drained from it. I watched his mind working, calculating, trying to figure out if I was bluffing or telling the truth. His eyes darted around the kitchen, suddenly seeing the smoke detector, the picture frames, the decorative molding in a new and terrifying light. Where were the cameras? How many were there? How long had they been recording? "You are lying," he said, but his voice wavered with uncertainty. "You are just trying to scare me." Am I? I kept my voice calm even though my heart was racing. 2 weeks ago, I called Detective Sarah Morrison and told her about my suspicions. She believed me, Derek. She brought in a team and installed cameras throughout this entire house. They have been recording everything since then. Every time you went through my files, every phone call you made about your plan, every single moment has been captured. Derek's hands clenched into fists at his sides. I could see rage and panic warring on his face. If that is true, then why have the police not come already? Why did they let me walk around free if they had so much evidence? Because Sarah wanted enough evidence to guarantee a conviction, I explained, taking a small step backward toward the kitchen doorway. I needed to get to the stairs where I knew the camera coverage was best. She wanted you to confess on camera. She wanted irrefutable proof of intent. And tonight, you gave her exactly that. Every word you said is recorded, Derek. Your timeline, your plan to make it look accidental, your admission that Richard knows nothing about this. All of it. "Then I will just destroy the cameras," Derek said, his voice rising with desperation. He grabbed a kitchen chair and raised it above his head. "I will smash every single one and destroy the evidence before the police get here." "They back up to the cloud in real time," I said quickly, continuing to edge toward the hallway. "Even if you destroy every camera in this house, the footage is already saved on secure servers. Detective Morrison is probably watching us right now. Officers are probably already on their way." Derek threw the chair against the wall with explosive violence, and I flinched at the crash. He was unraveling. The careful control he had maintained for months dissolving into pure panic and rage. This made him more dangerous, not less. A desperate man with nothing left to lose is capable of anything. "You stupid old woman," he snarled, advancing toward me. "You have ruined everything. If I am going to prison anyway, then I might as well finish what I started. At least you will be dead, and I will have that satisfaction." "Derek, do not do this," I said, backing into the hallway now. I could see the staircase to my right, and I knew there were cameras positioned at both the top and bottom. If he was going to attack me, I needed it captured from every angle. "Threatening me is one thing. Actually hurting me will add years to your sentence. You can still stop this. You can still—" But I never finished that sentence. Derek lunged at me with terrifying speed, his hands reaching for my throat. I stumbled backward, and suddenly I was at the bottom of the staircase. Some instinct made me start climbing, trying to get away from him, to get to my bedroom where I could lock the door and call 911. But Derek was faster and stronger. He caught me when I was only 3 steps up. I felt his hands on my shoulders, gripping hard enough to bruise. "You should have just minded your own business," he hissed in my ear. "You should have just taken your sleeping pills tonight and never woken up. That was going to be plan A, but now we are doing this the hard way." "The cameras see everything," I screamed, hoping someone somewhere was listening. "Sarah, if you are watching this, please send help." "I do not care anymore," Derek growled. And then I felt it, a violent, powerful shove against my back and shoulders. Time seemed to slow down as I felt myself falling backward. I saw the ceiling, then the wall, then the floor rushing up to meet me. My body hit the stairs hard, once, twice, 3 times, each impact driving the air from my lungs and sending explosions of pain through my bones. I tried to grab the railing, but my fingers only brushed it uselessly. I tumbled down 15 steps in what felt like both an eternity and an instant, my head cracking against the hardwood, my hip taking a devastating blow, my arm bending at an angle that was absolutely wrong. When I finally came to rest at the bottom of the stairs, I could not move. Every part of my body was screaming in agony. I tasted blood in my mouth. My vision was blurred and darkening at the edges. Through the haze of pain, I heard Derek running down the stairs, and then suddenly, his entire demeanor changed, like an actor stepping onto a stage. "Mom! Oh God, Mom, no, no, no!" His voice was filled with perfectly calibrated panic and horror. He dropped to his knees beside me, his hands hovering over my body as if afraid to touch me. "What happened? Did you slip? Oh God, please be okay." I tried to speak, tried to tell him that everyone would know the truth, but I could only manage a weak moan. Blood was pooling beneath my head. Derek pulled out his phone and dialed 911, and his performance was absolutely flawless. "My mother fell down the stairs. Please, you have to send an ambulance right away. I think she hit her head. There is blood. I am at 4247 Maple Street. Please hurry." His voice cracked with what sounded like genuine anguish. "She just lost her balance. I tried to catch her, but I was not fast enough. Oh God, this is my fault. I should have been right there with her." The next few minutes passed in a fog of pain and confused sounds. I heard sirens getting closer, growing louder until they seemed to be right on top of me. Red and blue lights flashed through the front windows, painting the walls in alternating colors. The front door burst open, and suddenly there were paramedics rushing toward me with equipment and urgent voices. Everything was movement and noise, and hands carefully touching my broken body. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Can you tell me your name?" A female paramedic's face appeared above me, professional and focused. She had kind eyes and short dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. I tried to speak, but my jaw felt wrong and blood was filling my mouth. All I could manage was a weak groan. "We need to stabilize her neck. Possible head trauma, multiple fractures," the paramedic called to her partner. They moved with practiced efficiency, placing a cervical collar around my neck, checking my vital signs, starting an IV line. Everything they did hurt, but I knew they were trying to help me. Derek was right there beside them, playing his role perfectly. "Please, you have to save her," he begged, his voice breaking with emotion. "She is my mother. I should have been watching her more carefully. She's been so tired lately, and I was worried about her balance on those stairs. This is all my fault." He even had tears streaming down his face, real tears that would convince anyone watching that he was a devoted, heartbroken son. The paramedics worked quickly to prepare me for transport. They lifted me onto a backboard, then onto a stretcher, every movement sending fresh waves of agony through my body. As they wheeled me toward the door, I could see neighbors gathering on their lawns, watching with concern and horror. Mrs. Chen had her hand over her mouth, and Mr. Wilson, from across the street, was talking urgently on his phone. Derek walked alongside the stretcher, maintaining his performance. "I am coming with you to the hospital," he told the paramedics. "I cannot leave her alone. She needs family with her." As they lifted the stretcher to slide it into the ambulance, the female paramedic leaned close to check my airway. This was my moment. This might be my only chance. Using every ounce of strength I had left, I lifted my hand and grabbed her sleeve. She looked down at me, surprised, and leaned even closer so she could hear me. "It was not an accident," I whispered through broken teeth and blood. Each word was agony. "He pushed me." I expected her to look confused, to think I was delirious from the head injury, but instead, something extraordinary happened. Her eyes met mine with an intensity that cut through all the pain and fear. She squeezed my hand gently and leaned so close that her lips were almost touching my ear. "I know," she whispered back, her voice barely audible over the chaos around us. "We installed cameras in your house last week. Detective Morrison is waiting for you at the hospital, and officers are arresting your stepson right now." Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I started crying. It was real. The cameras had worked. Sarah had been watching. Help had come. At that exact moment, I heard car doors slamming and boots hitting pavement. Through my blurred vision, I saw two police officers approaching from a patrol car that had just pulled up behind the ambulance. They walked with purpose directly toward Derek, who was still standing near the ambulance, arranging his face in an expression of concern. "Derek Sullivan," one of the officers said, his voice firm and authoritative. Derek turned, and I saw confusion flash across his face. "Yes? Look, I need to go with my mother to the hospital. She just had a terrible—" "Put your hands behind your back, please," the officer interrupted. His partner already had handcuffs ready. What is this about?" Derek's voice rose with panic, and suddenly the mask he had been wearing cracked and began to fall away. "I did not do anything. My mother fell down the stairs. It was an accident." "Derek Sullivan, you are under arrest for attempted murder and elder abuse," the officer stated clearly, loud enough for all the gathered neighbors to hear. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "No, this is insane." Derek's voice became shrill as the officer pulled his arms behind his back and secured the handcuffs. "She fell. I tried to catch her. Ask anyone. I called 911 immediately." "We have video footage of you pushing Mrs. Thompson down the stairs," the second officer said flatly. "We also have recordings of you confessing to planning her murder. You are going to want to cooperate, son." The color drained completely from Derek's face as the full reality crashed down on him. His eyes found mine where I lay on the stretcher, and for one brief moment the mask fell away entirely. I saw pure hatred there, mixed with disbelief that his perfect plan had fallen apart so completely. He had been so certain he was smarter than everyone else, so confident that his performance would be believed. "You set me up," he said, his voice filled with venom. "You manipulative old—" "That is enough," the officer cut him off sharply, pulling him away from the ambulance. "You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights as I have explained them?" The neighbors were all watching now, shocked whispers spreading through the crowd. Mrs. Chen was crying, her hand still over her mouth. These were people who had seen Derek helping me with groceries, who had watched him acting like a devoted stepson for months. Now they were seeing him in handcuffs, his true nature finally exposed for everyone to see. As the police led Derek toward their patrol car, he thrashed against their grip. "This is entrapment. She tricked me. I want a lawyer. My father will never believe this. He will never believe your lies." "Your father will see the video footage just like everyone else," the female paramedic said quietly beside me, her voice cold with disgust. Then she looked down at me with genuine warmth. "You are incredibly brave, Mrs. Thompson. You saved your own life." As they loaded me into the ambulance and the doors closed, shutting out the sight of Derek being pushed into the back of the police car, I finally let myself believe it. I had survived. The monster was caught. Justice was coming. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. The first thing I saw was Richard's face, aged 10 years in what had been just 48 hours. His eyes were red and swollen from crying, and he was holding my hand so gently as if I might break. "Maggie," he whispered when he saw my eyes open. Thank God you are alive." My body was a landscape of pain. 3 broken ribs made every breath feel like knives. My hip was fractured and would require surgery. I had a severe concussion, a broken jaw that had been wired shut, and countless bruises covering nearly every inch of my body. But I was alive. Against all odds, Derek had failed to kill me. Detective Sarah Morrison came to see me that afternoon. She pulled up a chair beside my hospital bed and held a tablet in her hands. "Margaret, I need to show you something," she said gently. "The evidence we collected. You need to see how strong our case is against him." She played the footage for me, and even though I had lived through it, seeing it on screen was shocking. There I was, in my kitchen, backing away from Derek. There was his confession, crystal clear, admitting to planning my murder for months. The cameras had captured everything. His cold calculation, his complete lack of remorse, his detailed explanation of how he planned to inherit my assets through Richard. Then came the footage from the staircase. I watched myself trying to climb away from him. I watched him catch me and heard his whispered threat. And then I watched him push me with brutal, unmistakable force. There was no way anyone could interpret it as an accident. The video showed premeditated, violent assault with clear intent to kill. We also found additional evidence in his room, Sarah continued. The envelope you discovered was just the beginning. He had a second laptop hidden in his closet with detailed research on how to stage accidental deaths. He had been studying insurance fraud, inheritance laws, and even toxicology websites about medications that could cause falls or strokes. We also discovered he had already forged your signature on documents attempting to transfer your house into a trust with him as co-trustee. He was planning to take everything even before you died. Derek was charged with attempted murder in the first degree, elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The evidence was so overwhelming that his lawyer advised him to take a plea deal, but Derek refused, convinced he could somehow talk his way out of it. He was wrong. The trial lasted 3 weeks, and the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Richard sat through every day of that trial, weeping as he watched video of his son confessing to planning my murder. The betrayal destroyed something in him. "I brought him into your home," Richard said to me one night, his voice broken. "I asked you to welcome my son, and he tried to kill you. How can you ever forgive me?" But it was not Richard's fault, and I told him that over and over. Derek had fooled us both. He was a master manipulator who had spent months constructing an elaborate trap. Richard was as much a victim as I was, losing his son to greed and evil that neither of us had seen coming. We attended marriage counseling together for 6 months. It was painful work, rebuilding trust and processing trauma, but our love was strong enough to survive. If anything, the experience showed us both what really mattered. We stopped working so much. We started spending more time together. We learned to communicate better, to pay attention to warning signs, to trust our instincts. My physical recovery took longer than the emotional healing. The hip surgery was successful, but I needed months of physical therapy to walk without a cane. My ribs healed slowly, each breath a reminder of what I had survived. The concussion caused headaches and memory problems for almost a year, but gradually, day by day, I got stronger. I changed the locks on every door in my house. I installed a new security system with cameras I could monitor from my phone. I updated my will again, this time with even more specific protections. I reconnected with all the friends Derek had isolated me from, and they welcomed me back with open arms and endless support. Mrs. Chen came over every single day during my recovery, bringing soup and companionship. The sentencing hearing was held 8 months after the attack. I sat in the courtroom and read a victim impact statement, describing how Derek's betrayal had affected me. I looked him directly in the eyes as I spoke, and he could not hold my gaze. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in prison without possibility of parole for the first 8 years. As they led Derek away in shackles, he finally broke. "I am sorry," he screamed, looking back at Richard. "Dad, please, I am your son. You cannot abandon me." But Richard sat, stone-faced, holding my hand tightly. He'd already made his choice. He chose the woman who loved him over the son who had tried to murder her for money. In the months that followed, I slowly reclaimed my life. I started working in my rose garden again, feeling the sun on my face and the soil between my fingers. I attended church and volunteered at the food bank like I used to. I visited my daughter and grandchildren every few weeks, making up for lost time. I invited friends over for dinner and filled my house with laughter again. My house, with its creaking stairs and rose garden, was mine again. The memories of that terrible night would never completely fade, but they no longer defined the space. I had survived, and survival had made me stronger, wiser, more careful, but not bitter. I refused to let Derek's evil steal my capacity for trust and kindness. Richard and I grew old together, just as we had planned, but with a deeper appreciation for every day we had. We had survived the worst test a marriage could face, and we had come through it together. As I stand in my rose garden today, 2 years after the fall that nearly ended my life, I am reminded that survival is not just about staying alive. It is about refusing to let someone else's darkness extinguish your light. The roses my mother planted 50 years ago are blooming again this spring, their petals soft and fragrant in the warm sunshine. I am 70 years old now, and I am still here. Derek tried to erase me, to reduce my entire life to a dollar amount in a will, but he failed. I am still breathing, still loving, still tending to these flowers that have outlived so many storms. I learned some hard truths through this nightmare. The first is that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness, but it also cannot be given blindly. I spent my whole life believing that if you treated people with love and generosity, they would return it. Most people do. Most people have goodness in their hearts. But some people see kindness as an opportunity and trust as a weapon they can use against you. Learning to tell the difference does not make you cynical. It makes you wise. The second truth I learned is that your instincts are trying to protect you, even when your heart wants to ignore them. I noticed the red flags. I felt something was wrong, but I talked myself out of believing my own eyes and ears, because I wanted so desperately to believe in family and trust and love. If I could go back and give myself one piece of advice, it would be this. When your gut tells you something is wrong, listen. You are not being paranoid. You are being smart. The third truth is that greed can turn anyone into a monster. Derek was not born evil. He was raised by a good man who taught him right from wrong. But somewhere along the way, he decided that money was more important than morality, that wealth was worth more than a human life. Greed made him see his own stepmother, not as a person, but as an obstacle, standing between him and financial security. That is what greed does. It blinds you to humanity. It makes you capable of unthinkable cruelty. But here is the final and most important truth I learned. You are stronger than you think you are. When I was lying on that kitchen floor believing I was about to die, something inside me refused to give up. That strength was always there. It was there when I raised my children alone after David died. It was there when I rebuilt my life from grief. It was there when I called Sarah Morrison and asked for help even though I felt foolish doing it. That strength is in all of us, waiting for the moment when we need it most. You just have to be brave enough to reach for it. Today, Richard and I still live in this house. We have new locks, security cameras, and a much smaller circle of people we trust. But we also have peace. We have learned that family is not defined by blood or marriage certificates. Family is defined by who shows up when you need them, who protects you when you are vulnerable, who celebrates your survival instead of planning your funeral. Derek is in prison where he belongs, and I am here in my garden where I belong, alive and grateful for every sunrise. Greed transforms people into monsters, but courage transforms victims into survivors. Trust your instincts, protect yourself without apology, and remember that your life has value that cannot be measured in dollars. True family honors life, while false family counts assets. Choose wisely who you let into your home and your heart. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have trusted your instincts sooner, or would you have given Derek the benefit of the doubt like I did? Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you welcomed into your life? Have you ever ignored red flags because you wanted to believe in someone's goodness? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else recognize the warning signs before it is too late. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is talk about these uncomfortable truths, because silence protects predators and knowledge protects victims. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. You never know who in your life might be going through something similar and feeling too afraid or embarrassed to speak up. Let them know they are not alone. Let them know that survival is possible and that justice can prevail. And do not forget to subscribe to this channel for more true stories of courage, survival, and the human spirit's incredible ability to overcome even the darkest betrayals. Every story we share here is a reminder that you are stronger than your circumstances, braver than your fears, and more valuable than anyone's greed. Drop a comment right now telling me where you are watching from. Are you in the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, somewhere else in the world? I love knowing that these stories of survival reach people everywhere, reminding us all that courage has no borders and strength has no age limit. Remember, you do not have to be young to be strong. You do not have to be physically powerful to be brave. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply refusing to be silent when someone tries to silence you forever. Sometimes survival itself is the ultimate victory. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for being part of this community where we lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and never let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. Your life matters, your story matters, and you deserve to live without fear in your own home. Until next time, keep fighting, keep surviving, and keep believing that good can triumph over evil when brave people refuse to stay quiet.